My name is Sabrina, 34 years old, and I was sitting in my favorite coffee shop on a peaceful Saturday afternoon when my phone buzzed with a number I hadn't seen in 4 months. Dorothy, my ex-mother-in-law. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity won. Her panicked voice cut through immediately. "Your husband's in the ER, bring money now." I looked at the screen, blinked once, and replied with a single word that would end everything. Before I tell you what happened next, where are you watching from today? Please hit that like button and subscribe if you've ever had to deal with toxic in-laws who couldn't understand that divorce means goodbye. The story I'm about to share started 5 years ago when I met Kevin at a medical conference in downtown Chicago. I was a registered nurse working in the cardiac unit at Northwestern Memorial Hospital, and he was an X-ray technician from a smaller facility across town. We bumped into each other quite literally at the coffee station during the morning break. His smile was warm, his apology genuine, and when he offered to buy me lunch to make up for spilling coffee on my conference folder, I found myself saying yes. Those first 6 months were everything a girl dreams about. Kevin was attentive, thoughtful, and seemed genuinely interested in building something real. He'd bring me flowers every Friday, not expensive bouquets, but simple daisies from the farmer's market because I'd mentioned once that they were my grandmother's favorite. We'd spend weekends exploring the city, trying new restaurants, taking long walks along Lake Michigan. He introduced me to his mother Dorothy about 3 months in, and she seemed lovely at first. A retired school teacher who lived alone in a pristine suburban house, she welcomed me with homemade apple pie and stories about Kevin's childhood. Looking back now, I should have noticed the red flags during our engagement period, but I was 29 and in love. Dorothy started calling Kevin every single day, sometimes multiple times. If he didn't answer immediately, she'd call me asking where her baby was. She had opinions about everything regarding our wedding plans. The venue I chose wasn't good enough. The flowers were wrong, my dress showed too much shoulder. Kevin always took her side, saying she just wanted the best for us, that she was excited to finally have a daughter. Our wedding was small, just 50 guests at a garden venue in Oak Park. Dorothy wore white. I kid you not, she showed up in a full white dress that looked more bridal than mother of the groom appropriate. When my maid of honor Jennifer gently suggested she might want to change, Dorothy burst into tears, claiming I was trying to exclude her from her only son's special day. Kevin asked me to let it go, said it wasn't worth ruining the day over a dress. So there she was, in every photo, standing next to us like a third member of the marriage. The first year of marriage showed me exactly what I'd signed up for. Dorothy had a key to our apartment which Kevin had given her for emergencies. Her definition of emergency included coming over while we were at work to reorganize our kitchen, because she didn't like how I arranged the spice rack. She threw away my grandmother's vintage cookware because it looked old and replaced it with a new set she'd picked out. When I came home to find her rearranging our bedroom furniture, I finally spoke up. Kevin's response was that his mother was just trying to help, that I was being ungrateful for her generosity. Every holiday had to be spent at Dorothy's house. When I suggested we visit my parents in Wisconsin for Thanksgiving, she actually called them directly to explain that Kevin needed to maintain traditions with his real family. The first Christmas, she gave Kevin expensive electronics and golf clubs. She gave me cleaning supplies and a cookbook titled Cooking for Your Man. When I tried to laugh it off as a joke, she looked confused and said she thought I'd appreciate practical gifts since I clearly needed help in the domestic department. The financial control started subtly. Kevin began giving his mother money every month just to help with her bills, he said. When I looked at our bank statements, I discovered he was transferring $2,000 monthly, 40% of his take-home pay. We were living paycheck to paycheck, putting off having kids, because we couldn't afford it while Dorothy was taking cruises and remodeling her already perfect kitchen. When I confronted Kevin, he accused me of being selfish, said his mother sacrificed everything to raise him as a single parent after his father left when he was 10. Dorothy started telling anyone who would listen that I wasn't good enough for her son. At a neighborhood barbecue, I overheard her telling 3 women that she didn't understand what Kevin saw in me, that I couldn't cook, couldn't keep house properly, and probably couldn't give her grandchildren either. When one woman pointed out that I was standing right behind her, Dorothy didn't even flinch. She turned to me and said, maybe if I heard the truth enough, I'd work harder to improve myself. The comparison game was constant and exhausting. Kevin would come home from visiting his mother, and suddenly my lasagna wasn't as good as Mom's. The way I folded his shirts was wrong, because Mom did it differently. Even the way I laughed was too loud compared to his mother's delicate giggle. He started spending more time at her house, having dinner there after work before coming home, leaving me eating alone at our kitchen table, wondering when I'd become the third wheel in my own marriage. The beginning of the end came on a Thursday evening in March. Kevin had been working late a lot or so, he claimed. His mother had been covering for him, telling me he was helping her with house repairs when I'd call looking for him. That night I'd decided to surprise him at work with his favorite takeout from the Thai place downtown. When I walked into the radiology department, the receptionist looked uncomfortable and said Kevin had left hours ago. My stomach dropped, but I tried to stay calm, thinking maybe he'd gone to his mother's after all. I sat in my car in the hospital parking lot and did something I'd never done before. I checked his phone location through the Find My iPhone app we'd set up years ago for emergencies. He wasn't at Dorothy's. He was at an apartment complex on the north side, nowhere near, anywhere he should have been. I drove there, my hands shaking on the steering wheel, still hoping for some reasonable explanation. Maybe he was helping a coworker. Maybe there was a work event he'd forgotten to mention. When I knocked on apartment 312, a woman answered. Jessica. I recognized her from Kevin's holiday party. She was wearing one of Kevin's t-shirts and nothing else. The look on her face told me everything I needed to know before Kevin appeared behind her, his face cycling through surprise guilt and then somehow anger. He actually had the audacity to be mad at me for showing up uninvited. Can you believe that I was the one intruding on his affair? The confrontation was brutal. Kevin didn't deny anything, didn't even try to explain. Instead, he launched into a tirade about how I'd driven him to it. I was too focused on my career. I didn't appreciate his mother enough. I was cold and distant. And Jessica stood there smirking while my husband of 3 years told me that she understood him. She made him feel like a man. She didn't constantly complain about his family. When I pointed out that giving his mother $2,000 a month while his wife worked overtime to pay bills might be something worth complaining about, he called me materialistic. I left that apartment and drove straight to Dorothy's house. Some part of me hoped she'd be as shocked as I was, that she'd take my side for once. I should have known better. She opened the door already knowing why I was there. Kevin had called her before I'd even reached my car. Her first words weren't sympathy or surprise. They were boys will be boys, and if you'd been a better wife, this wouldn't have happened. She actually sat me down in her living room and explained that men had needs I clearly wasn't meeting. She knew about Jessica for 2 months, had met her several times when Kevin brought her over for lunch. Dorothy liked her better. She was more accommodating, more traditional, understood that a woman's place was supporting her man. When I asked how she could betray me like this, she laughed and said I was the one who'd betrayed her son by not being the wife he deserved. The divorce process was a nightmare that lasted 6 months. Kevin immediately moved in with Jessica, though he told the court he was living with his mother to gain sympathy. Dorothy hired him an expensive lawyer with money she'd supposedly saved from her teacher's pension. They tried everything to paint me as the villain. Kevin claimed I was emotionally abusive, that I'd isolated him from his family, that I'd threatened him if he tried to leave. Dorothy provided a written statement supporting every lie. The financial betrayal hurt almost as much as the affair. 2 weeks after I filed for divorce, I discovered Kevin had emptied our joint savings account $30,000 we'd saved for a house down payment. He'd also maxed out 2 credit cards in both our names, buying Jessica jewelry and funding their weekend getaways while we were still married. When I brought this to court, his lawyer argued it was marital assets he had a right to spend. Kevin suddenly claimed he'd been laid off from his job, presenting a termination letter dated conveniently after I'd filed for divorce. In reality, he was still working, just getting paid under the table through his mother's bank account to avoid paying spousal support. The judge, an older man who seemed sympathetic to Kevin's sob story about his controlling wife, believed every word. I watched Dorothy dab fake tears as she testified about how I'd tried to turn her son against her. My own parents flew in from Wisconsin to support me, but Dorothy cornered my mother during a recess and told her she'd raised a failure of a daughter who couldn't keep a man satisfied. My father had to physically hold my mother back from slapping Dorothy across the face. The court security got involved, and somehow that became evidence of my family's violent tendencies in Kevin's lawyer's closing arguments. In the end, I got nothing but debt and freedom. The house we'd been renting went to Kevin since he claimed he couldn't afford to move. I kept my 8-year-old Honda Civic that barely started in winter. The judge ordered me to pay half of the credit card debt Kevin had racked up during his affair. No alimony, no compensation for the $30,000 he'd stolen, nothing. Dorothy actually smiled at me as we left the courthouse, patted my shoulder, and said maybe this would teach me to be better in my next relationship. The first month after the divorce was the hardest. I moved into a studio apartment on the north side of Chicago, far from all the places Kevin and I had shared. It was 500 square feet of space that was entirely mine, and that first night I sat on the floor with a bottle of wine and cried until I couldn't anymore. Not because I missed Kevin. I'd realized by then that I'd been mourning the man I thought I'd married for months already, but because I'd wasted 5 years of my life trying to earn the approval of people who were determined to find me lacking. I changed everything. My phone number, my email, my social media accounts. I blocked Kevin, Dorothy, and anyone connected to them. Some mutual friends chose sides, and I let them go without argument. If they couldn't see what had been done to me, they weren't friends worth keeping. Jennifer, my maid of honor, stuck by me through everything, even helped me move with just her pickup truck and determination. Work became my sanctuary. I threw myself into my nursing career with new passion, taking on extra shifts, not just for the money, but for the distraction. My supervisor noticed my dedication and recommended me for a leadership training program. 3 months after the divorce, I was promoted to nurse supervisor for the night shift cardiac unit, a position that came with better pay and more responsibility. I was good at it, really good, and for the first time in years, I felt competent and valued. I started attending a support group for divorced women that met every Tuesday at a community center near my apartment. At first, I just listened to other women share their stories, amazed at how many of us had similar experiences with toxic in-laws and manipulative exes. There was comfort in knowing I wasn't alone, that I wasn't crazy for feeling betrayed not just by Kevin, but by his entire family system that had enabled his behavior. Maria, a fellow nurse from the oncology ward, became my workout buddy. We joined a yoga studio together, committing to early morning classes before our shifts. The physical challenge helped me process the emotional trauma. I lost 15 pounds I didn't even realize I'd gained during the stress of my marriage. My body felt strong again, capable mine. I started sleeping better, eating better, feeling better. Through the support group, I met Lisa, a financial advisor who'd been through a similar divorce. She helped me create a budget, showed me how to rebuild my credit after the damage Kevin had done. We became friends beyond the group, having coffee every Saturday morning at a little place called Willow Coffee that became my new safe space. She taught me about boundaries, about red flags I'd ignored, about trusting my instincts again. 6 weeks after the divorce was finalized, I did something I'd wanted to do for years, but Kevin had always said was stupid. I went to the animal shelter and adopted a cat. Luna was a 2-year-old tortoiseshell who'd been returned twice for being too independent. The shelter volunteer warned me she wasn't cuddly, didn't like being picked up, preferred to do her own thing. She sounded perfect. Luna and I understood each other. We shared space without demands, offered comfort without suffocation. Word filtered through the hospital grapevine about Kevin's life post-divorce. Jessica had dumped him after 2 months when she realized he was broke and his mother was controlling. He'd been caught stealing pain medication from the hospital, not to use but to sell, trying to pay off gambling debts he'd accumulated. The hospital fired him immediately and pressed charges. Dorothy had to use her actual pension to pay for another lawyer to keep him out of jail. He'd moved back in with Dorothy permanently, a 35-year-old man sleeping in his childhood bedroom with superhero posters still on the walls. Someone from my old neighborhood told me he'd gained 40 pounds, was drinking heavily, and Dorothy was still making excuses for him. He'd been banned from 3 local bars for starting fights, always claiming someone had disrespected his mother. The golden boy was tarnishing fast. Meanwhile, I was building something new and entirely mine. I enrolled in an online master's program in nursing administration classes I attended from my cozy apartment with Luna curled up beside my laptop. I redecorated my space with colors Kevin had hated, bright blues and greens that made me happy. I bought plants and actually kept them alive, something Dorothy had insisted I was incapable of doing. My parents visited for a long weekend, and for the first time in years, I could be fully present with them without worrying about what Kevin or Dorothy would think. My mom helped me pick out new furniture at thrift stores, pieces with character and history. My dad fixed things around the apartment without making me feel incompetent for not knowing how to do it myself. They told me I seemed like myself again, and I realized I'd forgotten who that was during my marriage. It was a Saturday afternoon in late July, exactly 4 months and 5 days since the divorce had been finalized. I was at Willow Coffee with Maria and Lisa, our usual table by the window that looked out onto a tree-lined street. We were planning a girls' trip to Michigan for the following weekend, a celebration of my promotion and Lisa's successful business launch. I was laughing at something Maria had said about her disaster of a date the night before when my phone buzzed on the table. The number wasn't saved in my phone, but I recognized the area code and the first 3 digits. It was from Kevin and Dorothy's neighborhood. I'd blocked their numbers, but this was different, probably a landline I didn't know about. My first instinct was to decline the call, but something made me answer. Maybe it was closure I needed, maybe it was curiosity, maybe it was the confidence I'd built over the past 4 months that I could handle whatever they threw at me. Dorothy's voice exploded through the phone before I could even say hello. Sabrina. Thank God I've been trying to reach you for hours. Kevin's in the Methodist Hospital emergency room. There was a car accident, he needs surgery immediately. The insurance has lapsed, and we need $15,000 right now, or they won't operate. You need to get to the bank and bring cash immediately. I held the phone away from my ear, her panic so performative it was almost comedic. Maria and Lisa watched my face concerned at first, then confused as I started to smile. Dorothy was still rambling something about internal bleeding and time being critical, and how I needed to remember my vows before God. She actually said that. 4 months after her son's affair and our divorce, she was invoking wedding vows. When she finally paused for breath, I brought the phone back to my ear and said the one word that would haunt her forever. The silence on the other end was deafening. Then she exploded. How dare you act like you don't know who Kevin is? You were married to him for 3 years. You promised to love him in sickness and health. You're still his wife in God's eyes. Divorce papers mean nothing to the Lord. I let her rant for another minute, holding the phone between Maria and Lisa, so they could hear the insanity too. When Dorothy threatened to call my parents and tell them what kind of heartless daughter they'd raised, I'd heard enough. I interrupted her mid-sentence with a calm voice I didn't know I possessed. Dorothy, I don't know anyone named Kevin who would be my responsibility. I don't have a husband. I haven't for 4 months. If someone you know needs medical care, I suggest you contact their actual family. Please lose my number. The scream of rage she let out before I hung up was so loud, other customers in the coffee shop turned to look. My phone immediately started buzzing with calls from the same number. I declined them all, then blocked that number too. Within minutes, my phone was lighting up with texts from numbers I didn't recognize, all from that same area code. Dorothy had mobilized the flying monkeys. Lisa took my phone and started reading the messages out loud, in a dramatic voice that had Maria and me in stitches. One from Dorothy's sister calling me a shameful excuse for a woman. Another from Kevin's cousin saying karma would get me for abandoning family. The best one was from their neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, who I'd met maybe twice, informing me that good Christian women don't abandon their husbands in times of need. The messages kept coming for 2 hours. 47 missed calls, 32 text messages, and 12 voicemails I didn't bother listening to before deleting. Maria suggested we make a drinking game out of it. Take a shot every time someone mentioned God vows or family obligation. We would have been drunk in minutes. Instead, we ordered another round of coffee and chocolate cake, celebrating my freedom from that circus. That evening, curiosity got the better of me. I called my friend Rachel, who worked at Methodist Hospital, to see if Kevin was actually there. Professional ethics prevented her from giving me details, but she could confirm that yes, Kevin Morrison had been brought to the ER that afternoon. After some careful questioning, making sure not to put Rachel in a compromising position, I pieced together the real story. Kevin had been brought in after crashing his car into a light pole on Lower Wacker Drive. The police report indicated alcohol was a factor. His blood alcohol level was twice the legal limit at 2 in the afternoon. He had minor injuries, some cuts and bruises, whiplash, nothing requiring surgery, nothing life-threatening. He was being held for observation and would likely be released to police custody for DUI charges once cleared medically. The insurance situation was real, though not how Dorothy had presented it. Kevin hadn't paid his premiums in 6 months, too busy gambling online and drinking to manage basic adult responsibilities. The hospital would treat him regardless, they legally had to, but he'd be personally responsible for the bills. That's what Dorothy really wanted the $15,000 for, to pay his bills and bail him out of jail, continuing the pattern of enabling that had created this monster. Rachel also mentioned something interesting. A woman had been with Kevin when the ambulance brought him in, young blonde, crying hysterically. She'd given her name as Ashley and claimed to be his fiancée, showing a cheap engagement ring as proof. 4 months after our divorce, Kevin was already engaged to someone else, and Dorothy was still calling me for money. The audacity was almost impressive. I went home that evening feeling vindicated but also oddly sad. Not for Kevin or Dorothy, they'd made their choices, but for the woman I'd been 5 years ago who'd believed in their performance of family. I'd wanted so badly to belong somewhere, to be chosen and cherished, that I'd ignored every warning sign, every red flag, every gut feeling that something was wrong. My phone continued buzzing with messages, but now they'd shifted tactics. Mark, Kevin's younger brother, who'd always been the reasonable one, sent a long text apologizing for his family's behavior, but asking if I could find it in my heart to help just this once. He admitted Kevin had been spiraling, that Dorothy was in denial, that the whole family was a mess. He wasn't asking as Kevin's brother, but as someone who'd always respected me. I actually considered it for about 30 seconds before remembering that Mark had stood by silently while his mother and brother destroyed me in court. Dorothy herself had moved on to threats. Screenshots started coming through of Facebook posts she was making on community pages, claiming I was a heartless woman who'd abandoned my disabled husband in his hour of need. She conveniently left out the divorce, the affair, the gambling, the DUI. In her version, Kevin was a devoted husband who'd had a tragic accident, and his evil ex-wife was refusing to help with his medical care. I documented everything. Every call, every text, every social media post. Lisa had taught me well about protecting myself legally. I forwarded it all to my divorce lawyer with a simple question about whether this constituted harassment. Within an hour, he responded that I had grounds for a restraining order if I wanted to pursue it. The documentation was more than sufficient to prove a pattern of harassment and defamation. That night, I sat in my apartment with Luna purring on my lap and typed out a single message to send to Dorothy from a Google Voice number she wouldn't recognize. Your son Kevin crashed while driving drunk. He has minor injuries and will be arrested for DUI. His fiancée Ashley was with him. Stop contacting me or I will pursue legal action for harassment. I have documented everything. Focus on your actual family and leave me alone. The response was immediate and unhinged. She called me every name imaginable, threatened to sue me for abandonment, claimed she'd make sure everyone in Chicago knew what kind of person I was. Then she made a mistake. She admitted in writing that she knew Kevin had been lying about his employment during the divorce, that they'd hidden assets, that they'd committed fraud. In her rage, she'd given me everything I needed to potentially reopen the divorce settlement. I forwarded that message to my lawyer too, who responded with barely contained glee that this could be very interesting if I wanted to pursue it. For the first time in months, I had power in this situation. Dorothy and Kevin had tormented me, taken everything from me, and now their own dysfunction was providing me with ammunition I'd never thought I'd have. The next evening, around 8 o'clock, I was meal prepping for the week when I heard commotion in my apartment building's hallway. Voices raised, someone banging on a door, my elderly neighbor, Mrs. Chen, calling out, asking what was happening. I looked through my peephole and my blood went cold. Dorothy was standing at my door, hair disheveled, makeup smeared, looking like she'd aged 10 years in the 4 months since I'd last seen her. She was pounding on my door with both fists, screaming for me to open up, that she knew I was in there, that we needed to talk face to face like adults. Mrs. Chen had come out of her apartment and was telling Dorothy she needed to leave or she'd call the police. Dorothy turned on her, screaming that this was family business and to mind her own affairs. That's when I knew I had to act. I called 911, calmly explaining that my ex-mother-in-law was at my door refusing to leave, that I had a documented history of harassment from her, and that she was now disturbing my neighbors. The dispatcher said officers were on the way and advised me not to open the door under any circumstances. I put the phone on speaker so I could record Dorothy's continued ranting while we waited. She must have screamed for 15 minutes straight. The neighbors had all come out by then, forming a protective semicircle around Mrs. Chen, who looked terrified. The building security guard, a young guy named Tyler, who was usually pretty useless, finally showed up and tried to escort Dorothy out. She grabbed onto my doorframe, literally clinging to it, while screaming that I'd stolen her son's money, that I'd ruined his life, that I was keeping her grandchildren from her. We'd never had children, but reality had clearly left the building. When the police arrived, Dorothy immediately switched to victim mode. She was suddenly a frail, confused old woman who just wanted to talk to her daughter-in-law about a family emergency. She told the officers that I'd invited her over and was now refusing to see her. She claimed I'd stolen valuable family heirlooms during the divorce. She even suggested I was holding Kevin's property hostage and she just wanted to retrieve it. I opened my door, then staying behind the chain, and handed the officers a folder I'd prepared. It contained the divorce decree, printed copies of all the harassing messages from the last 48 hours, and a letter from my lawyer outlining the situation. The officers read through it, while Dorothy continued her performance, even attempting to fake a fainting spell that nobody bought. One officer, a woman about my age, looked at Dorothy with barely concealed disgust. She explained that Dorothy was trespassing, that I had every right to refuse contact with her, and that if she didn't leave immediately, she'd be arrested for criminal trespass and harassment. Dorothy demanded to speak to a supervisor, claimed she was being discriminated against, threatened to sue the entire Chicago Police Department. That's when she made her second crucial mistake. She lunged at me, trying to grab me through the partially open door, screaming that I'd pay for destroying her family. The officers immediately restrained her, and now she'd added attempted assault to her list of issues. As they put her in handcuffs, she wailed that she needed her medication, that she had a heart condition, that Kevin would die without her help. The paramedics were called to evaluate her medical claims. They took her vitals, determined she was fine, just hysterical, and cleared her for transport. As they led her away, she kept screaming my name, telling everyone who would listen that I was a homewrecker, a thief, a murderer, who was letting her son die. Mrs. Chen patted my hand and said in her broken English that she'd never seen such a crazy woman in her 78 years of life. I spent the next 2 hours giving statements, filing reports, and officially requesting an emergency restraining order. The officers were incredibly professional and supportive, especially the female officer who told me off the record that she'd dealt with similar situations and I was doing everything right. They gave me a case number and assured me Dorothy would be held at least overnight, possibly longer, depending on what the prosecutor decided. Later that night, Mark called from a number I didn't have blocked. His voice was exhausted as he explained that Dorothy had completely lost it when Kevin's fiancée Ashley had bailed him out of jail using her parents' money instead of waiting for Dorothy. Apparently, Ashley came from wealth and didn't need Dorothy's approval or money. She'd told Dorothy to her face that she was toxic and would have limited access to Kevin going forward. That's what had sent Dorothy over the edge and to my door. Mark also revealed something that explained a lot. Kevin owed almost $50,000 to some very dangerous people from his online gambling. He'd been stealing from Dorothy's accounts, had taken out credit cards in her name, had even tried to mortgage her house without her knowledge. The accident happened because he was drunk and trying to work up the courage to ask Ashley's parents for a loan. Dorothy had discovered all of this the day she called me, and in her delusional mind decided I should pay for Kevin's mistakes since I'd failed as a wife. He apologized for not standing up for me during the divorce, admitted he'd known about the affair and the hidden assets. He said Dorothy had threatened to cut him off too if he'd sided with me and with 3 kids, and his own messy divorce he couldn't afford to lose the financial help she provided. I told him I understood, but that understanding didn't mean forgiveness. He accepted that and promised to keep Dorothy away from me if she was released. That night, despite everything that had happened, I slept better than I had in years. There was something cathartic about Dorothy finally showing everyone else what I'd been dealing with privately for so long. The neighbors who'd witnessed her meltdown would never question why I'd avoided her. The police had documented evidence of her harassment. Even Kevin's own brother was acknowledging the toxic dynamics I'd tried to explain for years. 2 weeks passed relatively peacefully. Dorothy had been charged with harassment and criminal trespass, and as part of her bail conditions, she was prohibited from contacting me directly or indirectly. Mark kept his word and sent me brief updates just so I wouldn't be blindsided. Kevin was staying with Ashley's family in their Lake Forest mansion. Apparently her parents thought they could reform him. Dorothy was alone in her house facing foreclosure because of Kevin's debts. I was thriving in ways I hadn't expected. The story of Dorothy's arrest had somehow made its way around the hospital, and instead of judgment, I received support from colleagues who'd been through similar situations. My director pulled me aside to say she was proud of how I'd handled everything, and that if I needed any accommodations for court dates or legal meetings, the hospital would support me fully. The master's program was going well, and I'd started dating again, nothing serious. Just coffee dates and dinners with David, an emergency room physician, who'd been asking me out for months. He knew my story had actually been working the day Kevin was brought in drunk, and his response was that anyone who could survive that level of dysfunction and come out stronger was someone he wanted to know better. 3 weeks after Dorothy's arrest, I was having dinner with David at a small Italian restaurant when my phone buzzed with a notification from my lawyer. Dorothy's attorney had reached out with a settlement offer. In exchange for me dropping all charges and not pursuing the fraud from the divorce, Dorothy would sign a comprehensive agreement never to contact me again, would pay me $25,000 in damages, and would publicly retract all her social media statements about me. David watched me read the email, saw the smile spread across my face. The $25,000 was exactly what I needed to pay off the debt from the divorce and have a fresh start. But more than the money, it was the vindication. Dorothy was essentially admitting she'd been wrong, that she'd harassed me, that she'd lied. Her lawyer had clearly explained that if this went to trial, she could face jail time and I could potentially get much more in civil court. I called my lawyer right there from the restaurant. He advised taking the deal, said it was clean and final, and would give me the closure I needed. The criminal charges would be dropped to a misdemeanor with probation, Dorothy would have a record but wouldn't serve time, and most importantly, I'd have a legally binding document keeping her away from me forever. I agreed, and he said he'd have papers drawn up by the end of the week. The universe has a sense of humor, though, because as we were leaving the restaurant, we ran into Kevin and Ashley at the valet stand. He looked terrible, bloated and pale, his hands shaking slightly from what I assumed was alcohol withdrawal. Ashley was everything Dorothy would have wanted for him, blonde, perky, seemingly devoted. She was also clearly already exhausted, only 3 weeks into dealing with Kevin's reality. Kevin tried to approach me, but David smoothly stepped between us. Not aggressively, just protectively, his 6'2" frame making a clear statement. Kevin started to speak something about needing to talk, but Ashley pulled him back, hissing that he'd promised to leave me alone. As they waited for their car, I heard her berating him for drinking before dinner, for embarrassing her again, for being nothing like the man he'd presented himself as. David and I walked to his car in comfortable silence. He didn't ask questions, didn't make it about him, just held my hand and said he was proud of how I'd handled that. When he dropped me at my apartment, he kissed me goodnight and said he'd like to take me to the farmer's market on Saturday if I was free. It was normal and healthy, and exactly what I'd never had with Kevin. That night I called my parents and told them about the settlement offer. My mother cried with relief that this chapter was finally closing. My father, ever practical, said to take the money and never look back. They were planning to visit for Labor Day weekend, and we were going to celebrate my freedom, my promotion, and the beginning of whatever came next. The settlement was finalized a week later. The money hit my account the same day, and I immediately paid off the credit cards, the legal fees, everything that tied me to that old life. I had enough left over to start a real emergency fund, something I'd never been able to do while funding Dorothy's lifestyle through Kevin. I also donated $1,000 to the domestic violence shelter that had helped other women in my support group. 6 months have passed since that phone call in the coffee shop. Dorothy kept her word, or rather her lawyer kept it for her. Not a single contact, not even through third parties. Mark sends occasional updates out of kindness, not obligation. Kevin and Ashley lasted exactly 2 months before she kicked him out. He's living in a halfway house now, court-ordered after another DUI, working at a warehouse and attending mandatory AA meetings. Dorothy lost her house to foreclosure last month. She's living in a 1-bedroom apartment in a less desirable part of town, working part-time at a grocery store at 67 years old, because her pension is gone, spent on lawyers and Kevin's debts. Mark says she still refuses to acknowledge her role in any of it, still insists that I destroyed her family. But she says it quietly now to herself with no audience left to perform for. I sometimes wonder if I should feel guilty about how things turned out for them. Then I remember the 5 years of manipulation, the affair, the financial abuse, the attempted character assassination during the divorce, and the harassment that followed. They created their own destruction. I just refuse to be collateral damage. My life now is unrecognizable from a year ago. David and I are taking things slow, but it's real and healthy. He respects my boundaries, celebrates my achievements, and his family is refreshingly normal. His mother actually apologized for calling too early on a Sunday once. I almost cried at the simple courtesy of it. We're planning a trip to Europe in the spring, something Kevin always promised but never delivered, because Dorothy needed the money more. The master's program is almost complete, and I've been offered a position as director of nursing education at the hospital. It's a substantial raise and a chance to shape the next generation of nurses. My apartment is now a home filled with plants that thrive, art that I chose, and a cat who trusts me enough to sleep on my lap while I study. My parents visit regularly, and my relationship with them has never been stronger. The support group has become less about healing and more about helping others who are just starting their journey. I share my story with new members. Watch their faces change from despair to hope as they realize survival is possible. Some of them are dealing with their own Dorothys, and I tell them about the power of one word, the right word at the right moment. That word, who wasn't just a question that day in the coffee shop. It was a declaration of independence, a refusal to be pulled back into chaos I'd fought to escape. It was me choosing myself for the first time in years. Sometimes the best response to someone's emergency is remembering it's no longer your emergency to solve. Dorothy called me heartless for that response, but I know better now. It wasn't heartless. It was the first time I'd shown my heart the respect it deserved. People ask if I regret marrying Kevin, if I wish I'd seen the signs sooner. The truth is, I needed that experience to become who I am now. I needed to learn that love isn't supposed to hurt, that family isn't supposed to diminish you, that marriage isn't about losing yourself to meet someone else's expectations. I needed to discover that I was strong enough to walk away, to rebuild, to refuse to accept less than I deserved. The scar from that relationship will always be there, but it's no longer tender to the touch. It's become part of my story, not the defining chapter, but an important one that led to better things. When friends going through divorces ask how I got through it, I tell them the truth. One day at a time, one boundary at a time, one small act of self-respect at a time, until those small acts added up to a completely different life. Would I take that call from Dorothy again if I could go back? Absolutely. Because that moment of choosing not to recognize chaos, of refusing to accept responsibility for someone else's consequences, was the moment I truly became free. That single word who carried more power than any speech or argument ever could. It said, I don't know you anymore. You have no claim on me. Your emergency is not mine to solve, all in 3 letters. Thank you so much for listening to my story today. If you've ever dealt with toxic in-laws or survived a difficult divorce, I'd love to hear your experiences in the comments below. What was your who moment, that instance when you finally said enough? Please like this video if it resonated with you, subscribe for more stories of survival and triumph, and share this with someone who might need to hear that walking away isn't giving up, it's choosing yourself. Remember, you don't owe anyone access to your peace. Not even family, especially not former family who never treated you like family to begin with. Until next time, stay strong, set those boundaries, and never apologize for protecting your own well-being.